Whenever anyone tries to argue that feminism isn't necessary in the West because women in the West have all of the same rights as men, and arguably more so, it seems to me that they've forgotten the entire initial purpose of this movement. So the original purpose of feminism was to make society more liberal and progressive, and consequently a better place for vulnerable people such as children to live in, because in general women are supposed to be more sensitive, child-oriented, and empathetic. So whenever you look at societies that don't have this kind of, never have this kind of movement at all, of course it's going to be overrun with corruption and war and all kinds of stuff that is caused by an excess amount of testosterone. Like Sam Harris said, he argued that men actually they're born with inherently less free will than women because they are much more prone to experiencing excess or elevated levels of testosterone in the membrane, which causes them to act out in extreme ways, in much higher aggression levels that leads to extreme acts such as murder, rape, and assault, and all that stuff. But when you look at, even when you look at nature, like look at the society in nature that is run by the females in our ancestors. So that would be bonobos. So they're so much more peaceful and benevolent than their other than our other relative ancestors, which are chimpanzees. Now, chimpanzees are dominated by the males of the group, and they always have an alpha male that runs an entire gang of followers, and at times they can even conspire to take over the alpha male if they're feeling like he's no longer needed, or it's time for a new leader of the group. But does that look like the kind of society that anybody would want to live in? Of course not. So that's why women have to take precedence in order for society to become the kind of utopia that bonobos live in, for example. So the point of my video now isn't to argue that what is necessarily, you know, the point, or to add anything further to the argument against feminism in the West, because I have nothing to say in regards to that, in regards to men going their own way, or the whole red pill philosophy movement. But I just wanted to say that because feminism is a really, you know, it's especially strong in my country, and as you know already, I'm living in Canada, and I've lived here my entire life, and I've noticed how it is actually, backwards feminism has affected this place in such a way that makes it so that it does exactly the opposite of what feminism was intended to do in the first place. Because the women here, even though they take precedence, they're not really necessarily any different from the men in terms of empathy or sensitivity. And I know this from first-hand experience. All of the teachers that I had when I was growing up were incredibly abrasive and masculine, and I didn't understand what they were doing in such a profession that revolves around, when you're working with children or any kind of social profession that revolves around people, that is the most important skill that you need to have, is empathy, and the most important asset that you need to have. And it's not difficult at all. I mean, for most people, anyone can develop empathy. It should come naturally to anyone, but it comes more naturally to women than men. So you would think that in a society where women take so much precedence, like here, for example, that it should be a more empathetic and sensitive society in general, or overall. But that is simply not the case. As I discussed in my previous videos, you can learn more about my experiences, because I just touched on what I experienced And what I observed as far as, you know, the people around me, it seems to me that the gender roles are actually reversed in Canada. So the women act a lot more like men, but at the same time, the men act more like women. So it seems to me like there's an extreme amount of confusion when it comes to the role of feminism, and the gender roles have been reversed because they believe that is what feminism is really supposed to be about. And on the few occasions that I've encountered people who were genuinely, seemed like they were genuinely empathetic and sensitive and, you know, all that stuff, like they weren't even like in any kind of working in any kind of profession that was related to those assets whatsoever. Like the few people, if I encounter them and they seem like they're exceptionally emotionally intelligent, they tend to work in fields such as biotechnology or nuclear physics or aerospace engineering or stuff like that, that has nothing whatsoever to do with like how your emotional intelligence is like around other people, and it doesn't make any sense to me. So for example, I was really surprised, well, not really surprised, but I was really glad, actually, in a way, when I found out about Nicole Arbor, because it seems to me like a lot of people were surprised that she's Canadian, and they went on, like, some people are shocked, actually, and people are saying that she actually shattered the stereotype of the polite Canadian, but in my experience, she's actually a perfect representation. She is a perfect representation of the general population here, because, like, more often than not, they behave more like her, and, like, the women are here, their personality is more masculine and, I guess, abrasive than anything.
I've legit pushed small children and the elderly out of the way to get half of a pizza pocket at Costco. This has been weighing on me for a while. I can't go on the internet without seeing your titties, your ass, or basically up your fallopian tubes because you are an Instagram model. There's nothing wrong with being a gorgeous, hot, sexy, fiery woman, but there's a lot of do-nothing bitches running the internet right now, and I'm not cool with it. We want to vote, we want to be treated equal, we want to make the same amount of money as you, but we also want you to pay for dinner when it comes, because we had to buy our hair and our makeup, and this shit's expensive.
I know, everybody compares her with another YouTube star, an American named Jenna Marbles, who is, like, on the contrast, she's extremely sweet and genuine, and everybody can relate to her, and everybody loves her, and she's, like, so I think in regards to Nicole Arbor, she's, like, a so-called discount version of Jenna Marbles, in the same way that I think Canada is kind of like a discount version of America in terms of everything available here, and as well as the quality of the people here. But that's like something that is really, you know, it's a really long story. I'm not going to get into a lot more details about all the other aspects of this country. I just wanted to focus on the one aspect that I think has really destroyed it, because they took their interpretation of the word feminism and tossed it around, switched it to fit their own twisted interpretation that has nothing to do with the original intention, the original purpose of this movement. And what is the consequence of that? Well, you see here, like, this is just one example, but I mean, like, a little while ago, I recall finding out about this story about a guy in a small town in Ontario, or like northern Ontario, that nobody's ever heard of. Well, he was considered to be the most, I guess he was considered to be the most physically appealing, or, you know, socially appealing kind of like alpha guy that anyone could find in their town full of inbreds, which is why he had apparently like a long list of women who were fighting over him, even though he was a pedophile, and people were aware of that, but two of his girlfriends actually went out of their way to try to help him in fulfilling his, like, sick, twisted desires for children. Lies, love, manipulation, and fear of abandonment were the reasons why one of Shane Lund's girlfriends went along with his sick, twisted plans to rape children. The 60-page court-ordered psychiatric assessment explains how Catherine Thompson of Aurelia crawled into Lund's world of sexual deviation and couldn't get out again because she was terrified of losing him. Thompson, along with another woman, Avery Taylor of Aurelia, and Lund of Midland, have all pleaded guilty to several crimes, including planning to drug and rape children, sexually assaulting children, making child pornography, and bestiality. In the report, which states Thompson suffers from low self-esteem, Thompson repeatedly insists that she lied and told Lund she was turned on with his child fetish and his sordid plans to drug and rape children. I wouldn't have let him go through with it, she claims. It was an all-act to keep him happy. Thompson reported that she entered into a sexual relationship with Lund when she was 15 and constantly craved his love. She paid for all costs on dates or he would get mad, she said. Lund manipulated and groomed her, slowly revealing his dark fetish for children, especially toddlers, she said. You think I'm a monster, don't you? Lund said, but then he cried and she felt sorry for him, Thompson said in the assessment. So she pretended to be sexually turned on by children and told Lund she couldn't wait to have children with him so they could train them as sex toys. Thompson also said she was in a constant, twisted competition with his other girlfriends. If she didn't keep Lund happy, he would simply move on to another, primarily Taylor, who provided him access to children she babysat. Because they were just terrified of losing him, and I don't understand. Like, I couldn't believe that. I could only imagine this kind of story happening here in Canada. Like, I couldn't imagine hearing about it from anywhere else. Like, where else in the world do you think that this guy would be considered so incredibly, like, a catch that all of these women would go out of their way to... all of these women would go out of their way to... I just...